Got a phone call. Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On allpointstv.com. We are the station that is on your computer at your convenience, but we tape here the program called What's Going On from 2 o'clock to 3. And we are here every Monday. And we are here, rain, shine, sleet or snow. We are what's that bunny? What's that commercial they advertise where the bunny keeps on going? We are the ongoing machine. We never tire of doing the program. We're here every Monday, and we hope you'll stay tuned to what we're doing here at all the programs here at allpointstv.com, because everybody here at the studio is working hard, and we know we got a lot of work to do to compete with the alphabet soup out there, the cable networks, and we have a lot of competition, and we're going to eventually catch up and surpass all the excellence out there in broadcasting, and you're going to be proud of us, but give us another 10 years.
Well, as long as you don't go off and start making up stories about you when you fought in Vietnam, or you were, when you were like with Napoleon or something like that. Like, what was that, Robin? What was his name?
Brian Williams.
Brian Williams, yeah.
Brian Williams. Yeah, one thing about the station, and I watch all the programs that we do here at allpointstv.com, and I'll tell you, nothing is embellished here. You know, the word embellished, they were talking about Brian Williams was embellishing his story. You use words like embellish rather than saying lying. And, there's a certain language you use when you're dealing with people who are part of the elite. And so he wasn't lying, he was embellishing the news stories. He's now admitted that he doesn't know why he did that, which makes it even more cause for concern that this man is not stable. Yeah, and let's face it, he's got an important role. He's a newscaster. He's a talking head that reads the news. But, if he can't even keep reality... they're making fun of Reagan, who was going through, starting the earlier signs of dementia, Alzheimer's, for, confusing his role with being the president or something like that one time. But this guy is... it's sad if he's a dementia. I'm not going to make fun of a person if he's truly demented, who's suffering through dementia. But, it just galls me. This guy... he's gone, but there was not enough outrage on the half of his cronies. Mm-hmm. They should be more outraged. They put trust in this man. But what is that about on the left? Look at Hillary Clinton. She was talking about how she landed, and when the helicopter she was on landed, she was under fire and had to duck her head down, and I guess she was in a foxhole. None of this stuff happened, and it's just something about the left. That's why I was telling you before we started the program, John, that you need to listen to Ivan Sayet, because what he talks about the left, and he says that he talks about what they say, and he says, folks, that's not just a little bit wrong. That's 180 degrees diametrically in opposition to the truth. And he just goes on and talk about one story after another. And I don't know what it is, but something on the left where they are embellishing. They had a story, John. They had a story on Facebook, and they show Walter Cronkite back in the 1970s.
I talk about that current global crisis.
We're gonna freeze to death. And he was, and after he got through telling us how cold it's going to be, and we're going through another ice age, it won't be as bad as ice age, but it'll be close. And at the end of that narrative, he said, and that's the way it is. And so here we are, coming out of the 70s to now 2015, and we are coming to the point where the globe is no longer cooling. We'll be going to the ice age again, but now we have global warming, and outside, we are still wearing our coats.
Now they're just trying to hedge their bets by saying it's climate change. So they're casting a wide enough net so anything comes up, it's going to be safely in that category.
Yeah. Anything the left says, I'll tell you, I have to take it with a grain of salt, because there's been so much embellishing. It's so much embellishing of everything. And so when the left starts talking, I don't think it's Merrill Lynch talking. I don't start listening until I go and check. I listen to what they have to say, but I don't take it without checking behind them, because I've been caught embellishing the stories too much.
And speaking about embellishment, I want to tell you this is a good day in the sense that one of the person who was embellishing his legacy is leaving today. And I guess you all out there in the listenership know that today, Monday, the 27th, is the last day. Knock on wood, he doesn't. They've already installed. I hope they've already installed Loretta Lynch in the place of Eric Holder. But today is the last day that Eric Holder will show his countenance in the position of the Attorney General of the United States. And I was on a radio program this morning, and they were asking, one of the questions they asked the panel I was on was, what do you think will be Eric Holder's historical legacy? What will the history books say about Eric Holder? And I don't think it took me more than 2 seconds to come up with that one, because I don't think the history book's going to say anything laudatory about his 6-year tenure in that role. I see them saying primarily he's one of the most partisan attorney generals we've had in the history of the United States. And the travesty of his turn was his racial legacy. Both he and Obama will go down similarly in this respect, and that is that the country under their twin tenure, the President of the United States, and then underneath him, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, have driven a wedge in between the races in this country. The gulf is wider than it's ever been before. And I mean, we didn't have all this burning and looting continuously from one city to another. We haven't seen this since the 60s. And we are seeing this ripple effect that every time an incident occurs, people feel they're empowered to go out there and tear the community up, start burning things down, trashing cars, all this talking back to authority and expecting nothing to come back in return. We didn't have all of this animosity taking place until Obama took office. And when they asked Eric Holder what would be his legacy, I couldn't believe that he said that his legacy would be one where they will say that he actually did great things in the arena, in the civil rights arena, when Eric Holder has hurt the civil rights arena. I mean, everything this man has done has been a reversal of the things that Dr. King talked about. And for him to stand up there in that church where King spoke during the Michael Brown incident, going down there stirring up that group and making them believe that the problem was racial profiling when it had nothing to do with Michael Brown. It didn't have anything to do either with Trayvon Martin. And he thinks his legacy is going to be one in which he actually advanced the cause of civil rights. I don't know how you can actually have him say that with a straight face, because none of that is true. We are more divided as a country now than I've seen it in the last 40 years or so.
An approach, I've always been told that when I was a kid growing up, you're never supposed to make name calling or generalizations. Especially when you're a public eye like these guys are. Eric Holder and President Obama. But that's exactly what these guys have done. They have called people names. They have basically chastised people.
Yes.
They had blistering attacks on people who are currently living for things that happened way beyond the fact that they were even on this planet, which is like some kind of like what Thomas Sowell trying to create a cosmic justice or something. Mm-hmm. Like Obama's comment about Christians got to get up their high horse. 1,000 years ago they were doing this. And that was 1,000 years ago. You weren't around. How can you? And the victims of that are long dead. So this is another crisis totally. So don't try to attach the two together. Mm-hmm. But that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to make everything. If somebody comes up and murders you, and you found out maybe your great-great-great-great-grandfather looked at him cross-eyed, Obama would say you were deserved to get butchered for that. Mm-hmm. And that's the way his mind thinks. And that's in Eric Holder's position. That's not what our system of system of law is based upon. Mm-hmm. Retaliation and stuff.
John, it is his outlook, his worldview is very twisted and tattered and torn. He sees everything as relativistic. If the president has to deal with ISIS and the atrocities ISIS is creating, the president wants to make that relative to the atrocities that occurred in Christianity. And if he has to go back to 1096 when the Crusades started, then the president willing to do that as a way of making a comparison with what ISIS is doing as an Islamic group today. Can't find any parallels in Christianity with anything taking place today. So the president goes back and make it relative to what happened in the 11th century AD, which you call the Common Era, because everybody wants to be politically correct right now, but we're on a Christian calendar. So in the 11th century AD, they want to make the ISIS's atrocities today relative to Christian atrocities at a time when there was a crusade going on. And then the president acts like the atrocity was only on one side. Just the Christians were doing all the killing back in the 11th century, but then the Muslims are doing it now. So that's even, Christians in the past, Muslims today. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that it hasn't stopped.
Well, another thing is, too, it's like with the Christians of Europe at the time that he was talking about this Crusades, responding to several hundred years of advancement of Islam, violent advancement, murder, butchering, slaying people for no reason other than being Christians or Jews. So, he basically exonerates their sins. He thinks he's in that position. I can't get my mind around how this man thinks. If I were to go back and beat up on somebody currently because my ancestors are Hungarians, should I be able to go around butcher Turks because the Turks were brutal to Turks weren't nice to anybody, in history. They killed the Armenians, they killed everybody off, they killed the Syrians. So am I okay? It's okay for me to go kill a Turk now because 1,000 years ago they enslaved my ancestors?
Yeah, this idea that the sins of the fathers will be visited on their children because they are responsible for what their fathers did is not nonsense. But that is part of how this administration thinks, and everything is about something that goes on in the past. We are to pay for it now, and that's why this president is actually taking this country down, because he feels that a lot of the gains this country has made over the course of his history, these are ill-gotten gains that comes out of colonialism and things of that sort. And I've been in a place where colonialism took place, and I can tell you that this idea that the colonialists went in and all they did was extract from the countries where they were, you ought to look at the infrastructures where they didn't go.
I've talked to Indians who didn't like what the British did. Of course, they're younger Indians, so people from India, and they have some problems with what English people did to their relatives during the time. But they also have a great deal of respect for what the British brought to India. And one of it was they basically abolished the caste system, which was brutal, and which was ironic because the English had the class system, which is just as just as vindictive and unfair as the caste system. But they abolished the caste system of India, and a lot of people got a great deal of benefit from what the British offered. Let's face it, there's so many dialects in India, the English becoming the de facto language of India because it's much easier and consistent and constant throughout the country, which is actually India's several countries. If we want to look at it, it's actually several countries together. And so, the English were kind of a unifying force. But I'm not trying to justify the abuses of colonialism. I'm not. But they treated they treated the Indian people far better than the people from their own classes, from their own groups did. So
well, the criticism of that colonial period is only the criticism made because of the geography that's involved in it. People were colonizing the neighbors next door on a regular basis. The colonization that everybody is focusing on is people going out of their own neighborhood and colonizing other parts of the world. But colonization is nothing new to the world. If you were invaded by an army larger than the army that you had, and your army could not defeat that army in your land space, you were in fact placed under the duress of the conquering group. And if you look in West Africa, for example, where they talk about the three great empires, Ghana, Mali, and Songhay, those empires were colonial empires. What is an empire? An empire is where you have an emperor, And an emperor is nothing other than a king of kings, meaning that they are the persons, the overlords of all the lesser, more vassal figures underneath that. So he's the emperor, and they may well be kings, but they're not sovereign because the emperor has ultimate sovereignty, because his army was able to defeat the armies that were around in that particular area. And they celebrate that as I hear lectures all the time where they glorify the Ghana Empire in the 11th century, the Songhai Empire about 13th century, and the Mali Empire. In fact, the Ghana, Mali, and the Songhai Empire in the 13th century, and they make something glorious out of it. They actually celebrate it. But if you talk about people coming from another shore and colonizing in another land space away from their homeland or from the continent they're on, then of course that is the colonization everybody focuses on and criticizes. Even the same thing can be said about slavery. When you talk about slavery, slavery is not peculiar to the West, peculiar to Europe. Thomas Sowell has cleared that up in a book he wrote called Black Rednecks and White Liberals, one of Sowell's major works, although everything Sowell puts out in book form is a major work. But that one, chapter 4 of that book called Black Rednecks and White Liberals, on page 111 of that book, chapter 4, is called the Real History of Slavery. On that page, he talks about the universality of it. And he said that you would not speak of any other epidemic, which slavery was an epidemic because it was worldwide. You would not speak of any other epidemic that in such localized terms as if it took place in a single vicinity of the world, peculiar to a single people, of whom the enslaved were peculiar to one group. And when you look at the universality of it, and then you recognize how expansive it was, and how localized you view it, you can see something going on here in terms of a narrative at work to try to shame the West for doing something that is not peculiar to the practice of the world. The world was doing it.
Yeah, and that's it's ironic too that the Muslims are saying how bad the Christians are, but they're still practicing slavery of some fashion in a lot of portions of the Muslim world. So I mean, they're judging us by a standard that if they're actually applied, that could be immediately applied to them and find them condemned.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a double standard, and I think the double standard exists because I think there's something in that double standard that speaks to the psychology of the accusing agent, of how they view the accused. I'm putting a piece together on that right now. I'm thinking my way through it. And I'm going to finish up today when I go back, but I'm dealing with this issue in Baltimore, and what I'm putting together is this projection I think that you have on those signs that say Black Lives Matter. Well, what I'm putting together, and I'm thinking it through, is something new. I try to do something nobody else has done before, so I'm not interested in regurgitating other people's ideas. I'm trying to create new knowledge, but I don't want to just be throwing it out there without thinking about it and making sure that I've covered all the bases in terms of how I'm putting it together. But I think what you have here in this projection of all lives matter, I think that's projection on the part of the people that are putting those signs up saying that is projection of their own doubts. And what they're doing is writing it and addressing it to whom? What I'm going to be writing is that they're writing it to themselves, and I'm making that point to say that in terms of the Arab world and others who had slavery, and in the Arab world still have slavery. You can see it in Sudan. They have two Sudans now that split several years ago. They have Northern Sudan and Southern Sudan. But look at Mauritania. Look at Morocco, where you have slavery still going on in those parts of Northern Africa and other parts of Africa as well. But only the West is accused of the practice. And in the accusation, I think, there's something that is said about the accuser and how he sees the accused. Because what they're saying is that, what they're really saying, when you really try to get through the maze to arrive on the other side of what the accusation really is about, they're saying they expect higher incidents of this type of behavior, higher behavior from the accusing agent, because they're doing the same thing and there's no accusation in fact made. And I'm saying that to say that when I see signs up where people are saying Black Lives Matter, well, the question that should be asked there is when and to whom, because it certainly doesn't matter when blacks are killing other blacks, because I don't see anybody putting in signs up there when blacks kill blacks. And so when you begin to look at writing signs out and say Black Lives Matter, who doubts that? Who said otherwise? Well, one person, a single person getting killed by a police officer under whatever circumstances you want to talk about, some of it justifiable because we saw Michael Brown case, and that has nothing to do with racial profiling, has nothing to do with racism. It has to do with a police officer doing what any of us would have done, and that's defend our own lives. And to say Black Lives Matter in the Michael Brown case, and not say it in how many cases that we had in terms of homicides in Ferguson, and that's kind of typical of urban cities all over the country. When you don't have it said when blacks are killing blacks, which is a much more constant event, and there are no signs saying that, and you say it in terms of the exception to the rule, then who are you saying those, who are those signs written for? It makes no sense to say you're writing the signs for that which is not constant, and it has nothing to do with that which is a very constant particularity and peculiarity in the black community, but no signs go up. So I'm saying here that we have to look at the psychology in back of why that would be said in that particular case, where in the case where you have a lot more of those kinds of things happening, no one raises that question. And I'm going to raise a question today when I finish this narrative, and I'm going to try to create something out there for people to think about along these lines, that there has to be something to that as to why it's written in the exceptional cases and not written in the cases that are consistently taking place all over the country. I have not seen one sign yet in a black community where a single person has carried a sign saying Black Lives Matter, let's say, for example, in Chicago, or we can look in Baltimore, because as I was doing some research on the city of Baltimore, once the people went out to the street, the latest excuse hiding behind the casket of what's his name here, Freddie Gray. You know, Freddie Gray was the one that died. Something about his spinal cord. We will have to investigate and find out what happened. But that's the latest casket that they're hiding behind. That they're upset. But that's a very that happened in Baltimore, and that's not the rule in Baltimore. I was doing a study to find out about Baltimore's history, looking at where they fit in terms of. I typed in 25 most violent cities in the United States, and I knew they're going to be most of the urban areas, because these are war zones that we're dealing with in these urban areas. And there's Baltimore sitting right in there, right in the middle. And this mayor they have right now, the one that made this comment that she wanted to balance out the police coming in to stop the riot, wanted to do a balancing act between protecting the police officers, protecting the city, and protecting the rioters, and she wanted to make sure there was a balance between the two. So she says we gave the officers some room, and we also gave those who were destroying room for them to destroy. I don't know what she meant by that, but that's the comment that she made. And Baltimore is a very violent city. And what they're doing in Baltimore, and this is in an article that was written on the American Thinker, that blog had an article, they went back to September the 16th, 2014. There was an article that dealt with the rate of crime, the amount of crime in Baltimore, Maryland. And it said that in Baltimore, that the crime statistics have fallen like a hot rock, but the crime hasn't fallen. And what the article was dealing with was that they are reducing the crime by not counting the crime. In other words, the numbers are not the numbers. So what they're doing to avoid the fact that the city is out of control, violence is out of control in the city, what they do is they just simply don't arrest in some cases, so as to make it appear that the crime is being abated and is not quite as excellent as it was the year before, and things like that. So they're really fudging the numbers. And in that violent city, I have yet to see a single demonstration go on where the constancy of that violence. You don't forget, Baltimore has a dropout rate that is close to what you have in Detroit. I think Detroit is a little bit better now, but at one time, Detroit, 3/4 of the people in Detroit, of the students in Detroit, were dropping out of school. 3/4 of the males were dropping out of school in Detroit. 66% of the students in Baltimore are dropping out of school. And that would pretend to show the family structure, the breakdown of the family would probably be somewhere close to those statistics we read about in terms of single-parent households, approaching 70 to 75% in the black community. So Baltimore would resemble that. But why are they out there, is my question, holding these signs up, Black Lives Matter, in the exceptions to the murder of, or not even murder in many cases, the killing of blacks in these incidents, and the 93% of blacks who are killed by other blacks, there's nobody writing any signs, writing any words on signs and carrying out that to the public and saying in those incidents, Black Lives Matter. I mean, anywhere in the country. I just don't see it. I don't think anybody else has seen it, because I don't think it's taking place. I think they're only saying it in these incidents. And I'm trying to think about it. I'm going to do some more thinking before I finish this. I've already started the article, but I'm going to do some more thinking about it to get down, to put down some ideas using some books I brought to the studio to get to a psychological reason why that goes on. But I think it's projection. And you'd be surprised how much projection we do. We talk about profiling, but profiling is not really so much of what we are doing. What we are doing is we are projecting outward how we are to be received by the other person, and that person is projecting that image back toward the person who's projecting the image back toward that person, and he rejects the image that he's projecting, saying the person is profiling him. I think we're thinking, quite frankly, in a kind of inversion. We talk about the person's racially profiling someone. But what I keep coming back to, and I've done this a couple of times in this program, and what I keep coming back to is what is the racial profile of blacks? See, I don't think there's any group in this country being racial profiled except whites in this country. Whites are being racially profiled. Blacks are being racially profiled because there's not one thing that could be used as a profile for all blacks in this country. What would that profile be? They're certainly not saying that all blacks are racist. That's a profile they have for whites. In fact, the reason that when an officer, like happened in Freddie Gray's case in Baltimore, or the case with Michael Brown in Ferguson, or look in New York where you have the case with of Eric Garner, or Trayvon Martin, who they elevated George Zimmerman up to. I mean, they said he was white when we knew he was. When we saw his picture, we knew he was not white. He was Hispanic, and they was white Hispanic by the press reports. But the reason people went out there in the streets and began to demonstrate is because they were racial profiling. They felt that the death of these individuals by a person that was either white or made white by the media projection of this person was playing into a racial minefield where blacks are endangered because of their proximity to whites. And if that were the case, and not more so the reverse being the case, then you would not have these blacks moving into white neighborhoods as they're doing right now, escaping really out of the black neighborhoods, moving out of the black neighborhoods if they can afford it, and moving into the neighborhoods where whites are. And you would not have the same thing going on as far as persons coming out of their countries and coming into the United States, even taking their life in their own hands on these rafts that are not seaworthy, and coming across these stormy seas to get to these Western countries. They're not coming here to get closer to the racism. They're coming to get to a better condition than the condition they left. Otherwise, why would they leave? See, the narrative is inverted. The only group in America that is racially profiled in the United States, and I want anyone who says otherwise to prove their case. The only group in this country that is racially profiled is whites in this country. And we don't talk about it. It's not discussed. It is left imagined in the public square. But the only group that's racially profiled in the country, that is a profile for the entire race, is white. When they say, for example, that America is a racist country, which is not, and it never has been. Now that's what Dwayne Perry Perriman is advancing in his book called, he has 2 books out, and one of them is a remarkable book, starts in 1762 to 2008, and he's chronicling the racism of the Democratic Party from 1762 to 2008. And what he says in that book there is that America has not been in the past a racist country. What America has been is a divided country. And you can go and read, if you read the history more carefully, and you go and read the Constitution, you can see that to be the case. Because the 3/5 clause they talk about in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, the 3/5 clause is part of that divisive argumentation about the kind of country we're going to have. There were some that were pro-slavery and some that were against slavery. There was never a time when the entire country was for slavery, because the country was divided on that issue. But if you're going to have a United States, if you're going to do what you said in the preamble to the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, more perfect than it was under the Articles, but not as perfect as it could be, with the possibility of continuing the perfection of the experiment, because it's never going to be a finished product. But Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3, in which you have the 3/5 clause, that confused the person that wrote the book called 3/5 of a Man. That was the head of CORE. His name escapes me right now, but in that book, 3/5 of a Man, he got confused in having read it and thought that blacks were described as 3/5 of a man in the Constitution. That's not true. What that article deals with is that they were arguing where the South wanted to embellish, and so this is the correct use of the word embellish, wanted to embellish its numbers in the House. The House is the people's body, and it's based upon the population of the states. What the South wanted to do was count all of the slaves as part of his population in order to increase his power in the House of Representatives. Didn't have a problem in the Senate because all states have the same number of senators. Why? Because they represent the states. But in the people's body, the House of Representatives, that is a body based upon the population. So therefore, the South wanted to count the slaves as part of its population. And the North was standing against that because the slaves were on plantations and were denied the right to their freedom. And because of the lack of liberty among the slaves, they said no. But you got to come together to create a more perfect union. In order to do that, you got to take these two sides that are polar. They're taking polar positions, polar opposite positions, and you got to come together and decide how you're going to work this out. And what they did was to lessen the power of the South by counting some parts of the slave population, not all of the slave population, part of the slave population, so that if you had 100,000 slaves, let's say, in a state, then you would count them as 60,000 persons in that state, 3/5 of the population. And so therefore, the document based on that alone is anti-slavery. You see the contradiction that what people do not see is that it recognizes slavery with the idea that you want to limit its influence, which is a compromise. But the country is divided about the presence of slavery. And we're going to continue to work that out and work that out and work that out until we get rid of the institution before any of the nations in Africa did so. And the first nation that got rid of slavery, by the way, in terms of the world, was England, 1831. We did so in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, not the Emancipation Proclamation, but with the 13th Amendment of the United States. And they didn't do that in the place where there were more slaves brought to the Western Hemisphere than any other place, which was Brazil. Brazil didn't get rid of its slavery until 1888. So the West is being accused of a practice as universal. But what is that accusation about? The accusation is, if you look at persons that are making an accusation back towards someone, you have to look at the accuser to find out the intent. Then you can't ferret the intent out by looking at the accused. You have to look at the accuser. And as I pay more attention to the accuser, to those who write the signs out saying Black Lives Matter, I have to ask this question: who are they writing it to? And why isn't it written in other cases, which are much more constant, and they're written to in those cases which are exceptions to the rule? And that is not about the accused. That is about the accuser. And I think, as I said earlier, I think we have to go back and think in a non-inverted way. We're thinking in an inversion unconsciously, we're being made to focus on the person who is being pointed to. We're not looking at the pointer to perceive, to try to get it to perceive what is behind the accusation. And there's something else there that is not an accusation, but something that is laudatory in terms of of what's in the mind of the one that's pointing his finger at that person. And I think that we have to look at that from another perspective. I'm going to work it out. I've been thinking about it all day. Thought about it last night, quite frankly, because what I was looking at down there in Baltimore, what I was looking at in Baltimore, didn't make any sense. And what I've been looking at for some time has not made any sense. And I was going back through these books here. This book is by Shelby Steele. This one is called White Guilt. And I already worked through this title because I don't agree with Shelby Steele's premise. I think Shelby Steele is wrong. Some of the comments he makes in the book are right on point. But what Shelby Steele does in his book, he looks at the acquiescence that takes place when whites are accused in this country of being unfair, and they do things to get rid of the accusation. For example, the idea that whites were advantaged in the past. Now they're not advantaged right now, but they were advantaged in the past. Okay, so what happened in the country is that they put in 1971. This is really under Richard Nixon, although the idea was first of all talked about under the Kennedy administration, but really the one that actually began to implement this inverted process of compensating for that which cannot be compensated with, because the people that needed to have repair in their lives, they're not here anymore, and you cannot do reparations to repair the injury, because the ones who were injured are no longer here, and the ones who have been advantaged by that injury, which are the blacks who are here now, who are advantaged by the injury. I'm not saying the injury should be overlooked or not, acknowledged. I'm saying that to say that the injury is the injury of those who are here now is nonsense. And that can be seen by looking all over the world at blacks' conditions in other parts of the world, particularly in Africa, and see where is it in the world better than it is here. And so the idea that you have to repair for the day is nonsense, but the idea you can repair for the past is nonsense also. But whites actually tried that. Well, Shelby Steele says in his book that it comes out of white guilt. And for a long time, I bought into that because I did not think about it more deeply than I should have. I took that it has to be something that explains that, because what group decides to injure itself to advantage someone else? I mean, when somebody says fall on the golf course, you cover your head up. On the airplane, they tell you that if, in fact, the cabinet is depressurized and they drop the mask down, they tell you that put the mask on first for yourself and then your child. I know people have a tendency to want to do the opposite of that, invert the process. But you cannot help anyone else if you have not, first of all, secured your own well-being. You're not, because you might faint, and then you both will be in jeopardy. So they tell you to take care of your own, survival, and then you take care of the other. You have enough time to do both. But if you do one without doing the primary, then you will injure both. So when groups injure themselves and advantage someone else, they're acting in an inverted way, and the injury is not natural. And so the question comes up, why would people act abnormally where the abnormality is injurious to their own well-being? Why would they do that? And that's what I'm working on. Why would they do that? Well, Shelby Steele said that white guilt. But white guilt, it made sense to me at that time. This book came out, I think Shelby Steele wrote this book in, I'm going to say 2000, 2004, it sounds like, but I don't want to miss 2006. Wrote this book in 2006, and I bought 3 copies of this book because I've been loaning this book out, letting people read it because I want them to at least know the other side. And this is my third time buying the book, and I'm not loaning this one out because, you know, I I don't want to buy the books for the whole neighborhood. But I bought into Shelby Steele's analysis for a long time, from 2006 when I first read the book to about 2000 and I think 6 years later I went back to read it again because I was looking at some things. I wanted to go and say, what did Shelby Steele say again in this book? And I went back to rehash some of his conversation about what was going on, because I did see his the underlying title of his book, which was How Blacks and Whites Together Destroyed the Promises of the Civil Rights Era. I wanted to go back, I did see that going on, so I wanted to go back and see, what did he say again about the other things? But when I went back to the title, I was bothered by it because I didn't think that no longer satisfied me as an explanation of what it was I was seeing. And what I'm saying I'm seeing is what these accusers are pointing to that they don't see, but unconsciously they pick something up. That's my analysis.
You know, it's just like weird though. I mean, we have this set of we have a system in our law in this country where there's 2 opposing sides. You know, the prosecution and the defense for these, you know, the accused, and you have to present evidence, and you have to present evidence that these people did this. Now the presumption, and when it comes to racism, the presumption is automatic if you're a white or not a minority, you're guilty of it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, and let's face it, Obama himself talks about white privilege. He's enjoyed far more privilege than any of the white people I grew up around. He went to Harvard and Columbia. He lived in Indonesia. He flew around. He was a jet setter. Okay, so I mean, where has he been deprived of any kind of luxury? I mean, let's face it. He and Michelle have spent more money on vacations than any other previous president I'm aware of. And I also coach it that way. Where has he been deprived? Where is he and his friends, his cronies? Matter of fact, how many blacks does he really know and hang out with on a regular basis? They're all like him. Well-heeled, went to Ivy League schools, you know, had... You know, I don't know, they're very wealthy Marxists, you know, supporting him or something. Well, where has he been deprived?
John, they're not going to like this article that came out on WND this morning, written by Jesse Peterson. WND is the World Net Daily, and one of the writers for the WND network is Jesse Peterson, who had an article this morning, and he said that white supremacy is a myth, and white privilege is a myth. He said the privilege is black privilege. And a lot of folks are not going to like Jesse Peterson for saying what is absolutely true. Because when you look at America today, don't tell me about what it was in the past. I'm talking about right now in 2015, the 27th of April of this year, and where we stand at this time. We were talking. John was talking about Obama. Obama's not president if he's white, because that resume could not have gotten through based upon no experience, unknown quantity. Nobody knew who Obama was in 2008. I mean, he had spoken at the Democratic National Convention in 2004, but nobody considered him a candidate at that time. But Obama realizing black privilege. That's really why.
That's exactly what it is. He skated because, let's face it, if you didn't even give him a listen, you're racist. So if you do listen to him, but you got to be so convinced because his arguments are so sound. You got to by your own convictions and weight of evidence. You got to vote for this man. I never saw that because I have ability. As soon as somebody's in public limelight, I already could go the reverse. I think there's probably done something dirty, underhanded, sneaky, or somebody's working on their behalf to get them in that position. So I start trying to pull them apart. Mm-hmm. If they're in the public limelight too much, I have a distrust for them immediately. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was with Obama. I knew he was basically a phony from the beginning. He spoke like one.
You know what? I didn't believe him in being in Reverend Wright's church for 20 years. I never heard a sermon this man had. and claimed to have been absent when he was making all these foul comments about the country, which is really what Jeremiah Wright said every Sunday. I didn't believe that Obama had missed all of that, because that's really what the man was preaching up there. And unless he had earmuffs on, he had to have heard it as close as he was to this person who was the godfather to his children. This man married the Obamas. So this was no stranger we're talking about as far as Jeremiah Wright. So I didn't believe that part of it, but I didn't know the man was as, I'm going to use this word on this book by Ann Coulter. She has a book out called Demonic. This is another book, but there's one book out called Demonic. And I'm not talking about demons. I'm talking about the fact that this person is very devious in terms of how he hid himself. Obama knew the country would vote for him, provided that he put a face on who he was, which is the face we saw in 2008 during the campaign. He stood there on the stairs of the old State House in Springfield, where Lincoln had spoken in his Two Nations speech, and took advantage of the symbolism. By the way, they had nothing to do with Obama, because Obama is black through his father, not through his mother, and his father is Kenyan and not American, so he had nothing to do with Obama. But he stood there because Obama had picked up on the fact that there was black privilege in this country. And affirmative action is one part of that, where whites were even willing to disadvantage themselves so as to appear fair to those who accused them of being unfair. Well, Shelby Steele was saying that's because of white guilt. And I thought that for a long time, but I don't think that any longer. As I thought it through, I could see that whites are even injured when you call them racist, and even if they know they're not racist, they're hurt by the fact that someone would subsume that notion when they are trying to be as open as they can and fair as they can to other people and other groups. In fact, there's no group more fair toward other groups than are whites. And you can take that letter alone. I'm saying there's a black man. And I'm saying it based upon the record. I've studied the record better more objectively than probably any of these people in these universities.
Well, look at the end of World War II, and Japan had capitulated to U.S. Okay, we had a military presence there and ran the country for a few years. We forbade some certain activities. But there was no brutal roundup and butchery and stuff going on. There wasn't. They could have done that easily. I mean, I guarantee you, if the Japanese they did that to the Chinese when they got a chance to do it. Mm-hmm. They did that to the Koreans when they got a chance to do it. We didn't do it. We are actually above like that. We didn't. I've never heard any atrocities committed by us on behalf of against the Japanese, other than some people complaining about the bombs going off there. That's an issue I think is basically save lives in the process, Japanese lives. But no, I mean, let's face it, look when we took the end of the World War II. Japan did not Germans got treated worse. Over 1 million Germans were allowed to starve to death. People are not aware of that. 1 million German civilians died of starvation, even after the country was in the hands of the Allies. So nobody even talks about that. But the Japanese are given quite a bit of charitable acts done to them. And they were the aggressors in this conflict. So, I mean, that's just one point, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about... We're negotiating with Iran right now, and we're afraid of Iran using the bomb against people in the face of others that got the bomb. When we had the bomb, to the exclusion of all the other countries in the world, it was only used during the time of war, and that was used. I know people are not going to like this, but this can be proven by reading Toland's book, John Toland's book called the Rising Sun, where John Toland talks about what would have occurred if the atom bomb was not used on August the 6th, 1945 in Hiroshima, and 3 days later, August the 9th in Nagasaki. If it had not been used, they were in the war room in Tokyo, and what they were talking about was that we're going to bring them out of the air, down on the ground, and we're going to see if they're willing to have their blood shed to the extent we're willing to have our blood shed. 20 million, they were talking about sacrificing 20 million Japanese. And the 2 bombs were dropped on those 2 cities, these industrial cities. I mean, it wasn't targeting civilians. It was targeting the industrial base through which the manufacturing of the war. I mean, the instruments of war being manufactured there. If you kill the industrial base, you can end the war, and that's why those 2 cities were in fact chosen. But look at the fact to show you the tenacity of the enemy at that time, which, by the way, has had now 60 some odd years of peace since the war came to a close. Japan hasn't had a war since World War II. So look at that as another consequence of that. But the consequence was much more positive than persons give it credit for, even in that time period, because they were talking about sacrificing 20 million people in that. And when they dropped that bomb on Hiroshima, August the 6th, 1945, it took them, even though 2 atom bombs had been dropped on Japan, they did not surrender until 6 days later, after the second bomb had been dropped on that city. That shows you something about the kamikaze impulse among the Japanese. In fact, when the Japanese captured American soldiers, and when they had no other choice, I forget that place where it occurred, but the Americans had no choice in one of those islands but to surrender, because they'd run out of ammunition and the reinforcements never arrived and they didn't have anything to fight with. The Japanese were contemptuous of these people. They could not understand why they surrendered, because in the Japanese culture at that time, given the fact that they had the emperor who was a god in the Japanese culture, the thing was to die honorably, and they had the concept in their army that you save the last bullet to take your own life rather than to allow yourself to be taken by the enemy. And they had 100,000 which died in those 2 bombings in Japan. They had that many persons that died in Okinawa. There were 100,000 Japanese on the Okinawa island as they were doing island hopping on their way to Japan. They were just simply trying to clean up where they wouldn't have anything to their back to the rear, and on their way to Japan. And they had to kill every Japanese practically on that island in order to effect a victory on that island. They died. In fact, you see Germans with their hands up. You see Italians with their hands up. Show me these pictures that you have in World War II where these Japanese have their hands up. And I mean, we're talking about all these islands and so on and so forth. So to tie this all up, I want to make the point that this projection that we're looking at, this acquisition, we're looking at something that's quite phenomenal, to be honest with you. And I think that what we're looking at is not white guilt that is causing this restitution to go on, even if they're not guilty of the accusation. What we're looking at here is white culture. And that culture, which has created a enlightenment period, not seen anywhere else in the world, and also a movement that's antithetical to the experience and the existence of slavery, all that starts in the West, comes out of the philosophy of the West. And the question is, why would that be the case? And I think what the world has done is picked up on that, and by them making the accusation, you can hear the inverted admiration in the accusation that is in fact made. And that's what I was saying earlier on the program, is that when they start to talk about Black Lives Matter, I don't think they're talking to whites. I think that given the rarity of those occurrences and the silence that goes on in that which is much more constant, I think that is a projection out and a parroting back toward themselves to reinforce their own views of it, because they're the ones that have doubt. And so that rhetoric is really aimed at them. And I would ask them this question, and I'll be asking that in my narrative when I finish it, and I'll be asking the question, when does it matter and to whom does it matter? Because it certainly does not seem to matter to blacks, because blacks don't protest blacks killing blacks, and that's 93% of the black homicides in this country, blacks killing other blacks. Okay, we got to get out of here again. I do want you to read a couple of these books I brought to the studio. One of them is White Guilt by Shelby Steele. If you don't read this book by Larry Elder called The 10 Things You Can't Say in America, read the first chapter. That's going to surprise you. I'll let you find out what is the first chapter. And then this book right here by Ann Coulter, one of my favorite writers, is called Mugged, and the subtitle is Racial Demagoguery from the 70s to Obama. Okay, that's a wrap for the day. Hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you next week the same time at 2 o'clock at allpointstv.com. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.